There's a subreddit called r/economic collapse where users are bracing for the worst, seeing the economic situation as dire. Jennifer Soar on Business Insider views it as a Soviet Union-style U.S. economic crash. The subreddit has grown 80% from late 2021 to 2023, and searches for stock market crash and economic crash are up 17% and 15%. At this point, a large portion of the middle class is struggling to get by. The housing market, long burdened by high mortgage rates, now sees sellers in trouble due to rising supply. Many homes are worth less than their mortgages, and company bankruptcies are surging. So, with the public and even some experts like Ray Dalio, Jamie Dimon, and Jeffrey Gundlach warning people about the state of the U.S. economy, it truly makes you wonder, is America headed for collapse? Today, let's dive into economic trends, its historical cycle, politics, alliances, and more. When money loses all of its value or is no longer used by the public or the government, there is a currency collapse. This causes economic chaos, financial trouble, and often political unrest. Usually it means soaring import costs, abnormally high inflation, and investors fleeing the market because they have lost faith in the currency or the economy. So what does this mean for the U.S.? We can look at the current economic trends in the country and see where it lies. Let's start with the national debt. The U.S. national debt is incredibly high and keeps rising. In 2020, it was around $26.9 trillion, and by 2024, it has jumped to $34.7 trillion. This increase is due to several factors. When the federal government spends more than it earns, it has to borrow money to cover the difference, adding to the national debt each year. The main reasons for these deficits are predictable: an aging population, increasing healthcare costs, and a tax system that doesn't bring in enough money to pay for the promises made by the government. This precarious condition has been made worse by the coronavirus pandemic, which has had a severe negative impact on the economy and necessitated large legislative spending. If this trend continues, the national debt will keep rising dangerously. As lawmakers deal with growing defense needs and social safety programs, the Congressional Budget Office, or CBO, projected that by 2034, federal debt will be 122% of the U.S. annual economic output. According to the Washington Post, the national debt is expected to exceed $50 trillion in 10 years. The deficit is projected to reach $1.9 trillion this fiscal year and keep growing until the total national debt hits $50.7 trillion by 2034. This updated forecast is higher than the CBO's previous estimate of $48.3 trillion and 116% of economic output by 2034. These figures add urgency for policymakers in 2025 to address the nation's financial health. Large parts of the tax code are set to expire next year, possibly leading to significant tax increases for individuals and families. Congress suspended the debt limit in 2023, but this will also expire next year, setting up a major conflict between the two parties over federal spending. The dollar loses its value due to inflation, which could result from this increase in national debt. A high level of debt may make people less confident in the government's capacity to handle its finances, which could cause the dollar to weaken. Another important trend is the trade deficit. The U.S. consistently imports more than it exports, leading to a persistent trade deficit. This means foreign countries hold more U.S. dollars, which can weaken the dollar's value. According to Trading Economics, using data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the U.S. trade deficit grew to $74.6 billion in April 2024, the largest since October 2022. This is up from a revised $68.6 billion in March and lower than the forecasted $76.1 billion gap. Imports rose by 8.7% to $338.2 billion, driven by increases in passenger cars, computer accessories, telecommunications equipment, and crude oil, though imports of transport equipment fell. Meanwhile, exports inched up by just 0.8% to $263.7 billion, with gains in pharmaceutical preparations, electric apparatus, and semiconductors. However, exports of industrial supplies, travel, and financial services declined. Another key trend to watch is the global economic landscape. Global slowdowns or financial crises often lead investors to seek safe currencies like the dollar. However, if the US appears unstable, the reverse can happen. This shift is already evident. For instance, Russia and Saudi Arabia are considering using the Chinese yuan for oil trades, reducing the dominance of the US dollar. In 2023, Brazilian President Lula also advocated for less reliance on the US dollar in global trade. Furthermore, policymakers discussed reducing their dependence on the US dollar, the Japanese yen, and the euro, favoring local currencies instead at the ASEAN finance ministers and central banks meeting back in March. Then what do the experts say about all this? We're going to have a debt crisis in this country. Billionaire investor and founder of Bridgewater Associates Ray Dalio warned on CNBC back in September 2023. With U.S. debt levels skyrocketing, investors worry that rising interest rates will worsen the fiscal situation, cutting demand for treasuries. In addition, Dalio forecast that economic growth may reach almost zero, signifying a sharp recession. And he's not alone in his concerns. In 2022, J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon advised to brace yourself for an economic hurricane due to the Fed's actions and the Ukraine war. However, by March 2024, the Wall Street Journal published, Jamie Dimon and Ray Dalio warned of an economic disaster that never came. What now? Both Dimon and Dalio admitted their predictions didn't come true. Instead, the regional banking crisis in March 2023 involved specific banks with unique problems, like less sticky deposits or involvement in crypto money laundering, and had little overall economic impact. Dalio confessed, "I was bearish on the economy. I got it wrong. I got it wrong because ordinarily, when you raise interest rates, it curtails private sector demand and asset prices and slows things down. But that didn't happen. There was a historic transfer of wealth. The balance sheets of the private sector improved a lot, and the balance sheet of the government deteriorated a lot. Since the 1900s, countries like Argentina, Hungary, Chile, Angola, Zimbabwe, and Germany have faced severe currency crises. These collapses occur when people start to doubt the value of money and its ability to be exchanged. Once trust in a currency fades, its downfall begins. There are a number of causes for an economic empire to collapse, or any country for that matter. Let's name a few, shall we? Firstly, there are unsustainable economic practices, like relying too much on one resource, such as mining. When that resource runs out, it can cause economic problems. For instance, Spain's dependence on New World silver. Excessive debt and spending also falls under this category. When a government spends too much money and can't collect enough taxes, it leads to huge debt. Take Greece's debt crisis as an example. Their overspending caused deficits and made their debt levels rise. Another factor is financial excesses. These occur when domestic credit expands quickly and uncontrollably in the financial markets. In 2008, Iceland faced a financial crisis driven by a rapid expansion in credit and financial markets. Icelandic banks took on substantial foreign debt, and these excessive financial practices led to the collapse of the Icelandic krona during the global financial crisis. Lastly, there's also political instability and social unrest like equality and corruption. Economic progress may be slowed by widening income gaps and a corrupt government that generates social unrest and anger. The French Revolution, for example, is partly rooted in this. Additionally, war and military spending is also a factor. Ongoing conflict hinders economic activity, reduces resources, and interferes with trade. For example, the expenses of World War I contributed to the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. As for the current economic state of the U.S., a few things are apparent. First is debt. The U.S. national debt is high and continues to rise, similar to how unsustainable spending contributed to the decline of empires. Social inequality comes next. There's a wealth divide in the U.S., and there are worries that the middle class is becoming smaller. In certain historical circumstances, social instability came before economic collapse. When it comes to social unrest in light of a war, though the chances of a war occurring between the U.S. and China are uncertain, the ever-evolving rivalry of the two economic giants has continued to affect the economy. Let's talk about the upcoming U.S. election and how the surge in populism can play a hand in it. The first U.S. Republican primary is just weeks away, and former President Donald Trump, known for his populist strategies, has strong backing. Meanwhile, 1 out of every 3 Europeans is now opting to vote for populist parties. In a New York Times column, David Brooks talked about a 2024 Ipsos report that surveyed 20,630 adults in 28 countries. About 59% of Americans think their country is declining, similar to the 58% global average. Additionally, 60% of Americans believe the system is broken, close to the 61% of people worldwide who agree. Hostility toward elites is also common, with 69% of Americans and 67% globally feeling that political and economic elites don't care about hardworking people. On authoritarian views, 66% of Americans believe the country needs a strong leader to challenge the rich and powerful, matching the 63% global sentiment. Moreover, 40% of Americans think a strong leader should be willing to break the rules, compared to 49% globally. These findings indicate a political climate in the U.S. and worldwide that favors right-wing populists. This is crucial as 2024 will see national elections in at least 64 countries, showing that populism is becoming a major global force. But what does populism have to do with a country's economy? Populist policies frequently prioritize immediate benefits over long-term investments, which can result in higher government spending and lower investment overall, slowing economic growth. Additionally, populist policies like trade wars and protectionism can disrupt supply networks, raise consumer prices, and increase inflation. But there are also potential positive effects of populism on the economy, including reducing income inequality. Some populist policies focus on this issue, which can help boost economic growth over time. For example, raising the minimum wage gives consumers more money to spend, which can increase demand and stimulate the economy. While we're on the topic of politics and populism, let's look at how political polarization affects a country's unity, particularly in the U.S. People on opposing sides of the political spectrum see each other with distrust and hostility, which has led to a rise in animosity and suspicion. This makes it challenging to come to an agreement and cooperate for the common good. Also, politicians in government frequently prioritize gaining political points against their rivals over finding solutions to challenges, which results in legislative gridlock and the inability to take up crucial subjects. Additionally, political differences also affect personal relationships, making it challenging to keep up family and friendship ties with those who have opposing political beliefs. Extreme viewpoints become more popular in such a polarized environment, as more people identify as alienated from the mainstream and are drawn to radical groups or parties. This rise in extremism further weakens democracy, as people lose faith in the government's ability to function effectively, undermining the democratic process. There are several signs that suggest social connections are weakening and persisting, making the condition of the U.S. social fabric a lot more complex. Steve Corbin, a professor emeritus of marketing at the University of Northern Iowa, analyzed the political, economic, and social landscape of 2023 while looking ahead to 2024 in his Des Moines Register column. He found that despite predictions of a recession in 2023, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen highlighted several positive developments. The Federal Reserve's actions reduced inflation from 9.1% in 2022 to 3.1%. Annual growth averaged about 3%. New business startups hit a record pace, the unemployment rate dropped below 4%, and middle-income households saw higher earnings, more wealth, and increased purchasing power compared to pre-pandemic times. 4 major economic measures greatly benefited Americans: the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, the $1.75 trillion Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the $1.2 trillion Inflation Reduction Act, and the $280 billion CHIPS and Science Act. As a result, the American economy produced 2.6% more goods and services, and wage gains outpaced inflation, with even more significant improvements expected in 2024. In a closer look at the social fabric of 2023, the crime rate decreased, and major stock indexes soared, significantly boosting the retirement savings of over 150 million Americans. However, there were also notable changes. Civic participation declined, with fewer Americans volunteering, joining clubs, or knowing their neighbors compared to previous decades. Family structures have become more diverse, moving away from a single predominant form. While this diversity isn't inherently negative, it does impact traditional social support systems. A 2023 survey by the Pew Research Center revealed that Americans are more accepting of some family types than others, and there is a broad pessimism about the future of marriage and family institutions. These changes reflect both the erosion and persistence of social connections in the country. When considering the U.S.'s future when it comes to its connections, a number of nations provide significant challenges, notable for their persistent cyber attacks and efforts to distribute misinformation, false political advertisements, and social media propaganda comparable to what was observed in the 2016 presidential election include China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. These nations still engage in covert and overt hostilities with the U.S., Taiwan, Israel, Hamas, Gaza, and Ukraine. Steve Corbin says that having a strong president who opposes these actions and does not honor their autocratic leaders is crucial. Jamie Dimon expressed caution about the U.S. economy in the next couple of years due to various financial and geopolitical risks. In an interview with CNBC, he says, "You have all these very powerful forces that are going to be affecting us in 24 and 25. Dimon mentioned factors like the situation in Ukraine, terrorist activities in Israel, and issues in the Red Sea that could impact the economy. Let's dive into some of these relations, shall we? The U.S.-Russian relationship has been severely strained by the situation in Ukraine. The U.S. has placed sanctions on Russia and is providing military assistance to Ukraine. The Bureau of Political Military Affairs states that the U.S., along with its allies and partners, stands together in supporting Ukraine against Russia's deliberate and unjustified war. In terms of numbers, the U.S. has provided around $51.2 billion in military aid since Russia's large-scale invasion in 2022, and approximately $54 billion since Russia's initial invasion in 2014. And it's not just Russia. The relationship between the U.S. and China is a big deal. In 2023, U.S. officials talked about the need to reduce risk from China. This means they want to be less dependent on Chinese markets and suppliers, but they still want to keep some connections. The Biden administration sees this as a way to handle the uncertainty in global politics without completely cutting ties with China. Interestingly, Mexico and Canada became America's top trading partners in the first 9 months of last year, surpassing China. They made up a bigger part of U.S. trade, showing a shift in focus. In the Indo-Pacific region, there's a mix of economic competition and strategic rivalry as both countries try to gain influence. President Joe Biden emphasized the importance of alliances during a press conference with Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida in April 2024. The U.S. has been working hard to build partnerships, especially in the Indo-Pacific region, to counter China's growing influence and assertiveness there. Over the past few years, the U.S. has strengthened ties with countries like Japan, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Singapore, and has also fostered new relationships between nations like Japan and South Korea, Australia, and the UK. This strategy reflects not just America's diplomatic goals, but also concerns about China's actions in the region. Experts say that countries like the Philippines, Japan, and Southeast Asian nations are worried about China's behavior, which is driving this alliance-building effort. So, what do these relations have to do with the overall economy? The U.S. economy is huge and has a big impact on the world market. Americans make over 20% of the world's total income, and the U.S. is the biggest national economy globally and does a lot of trading worldwide. This means changes in the U.S. economy have the potential to affect the whole world and vice versa. For instance, if there's a global recession, demand for U.S. exports may drop, causing job losses and less economic activity in the U.S. Also, trade problems like trade wars with China can mess up supply chains, increase prices for U.S. consumers and businesses, and slow down the economy. As for currency fluctuations, a strong U.S. dollar can make U.S. goods more expensive globally, while a weaker dollar can make imports cheaper. This matters because the U.S. dollar is a big deal. It's the world's main reserve currency and has the backing of the biggest gold reserves. Additionally, Other countries hold on to a collection of US dollars instead of gold. So, will the US dollar collapse soon? There are a few scenarios that could cause sudden problems for the currency. One is if inflation and debt both alarmingly rise, forcing the Fed to hike interest rates quickly. If the US can't afford its debts, foreign creditors might ditch the dollar, causing it to crash. People may also lose faith in the dollar if the US had a severe recession or depression without bringing down the rest of the world. But as experts like Ray Dalio and Jamie Dimon had a few hiccups in their prediction about the country going into a financial crisis, we can never know for certain. So as we monitor the economic state of our own countries, it is vital for us to brace ourselves and financially prepare. Thanks for watching.